Hello, my name is Mark Little. I'm going to go ridiculously broad for the last 7 minutes. I'm the last of the lightning speakers before we go, and all stands between you, coffee, water, bathrooms, fruit baskets. So what I'm going to do is to focus a little bit on what I think is a key misunderstood distinction between truth and trust. Let me just challenge you for a moment. Tomorrow morning, you all have the money in your back pocket to set up a news organization from scratch. And what you decide to do is you set up the first news organization that is fit for purpose in the post-truth era, right? So I'm asking you to imagine you have all that money, all that staff, you're building your newsroom from scratch. I'm going to ask you not to concentrate on tools and resources and technology to fact check. I'm going to ask you to do something more. I'm going to ask you to start from the supposition that we are suffering an implosion in trust in journalism. It's not just about truth, it's not just about facts. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient as we build this newsroom to restore trust in journalism. And I say all of this because I have a bit of experience. I've done this one time before in my career, which starts at this photograph. It's amazing, it's 25 years ago, it's amazing how little I have changed. But it's remarkable how much the tectonic plates that underpin journalism have shifted in the 25 years since I've been a journalist. I was a foreign correspondent. We owned the means of production of news. We went to places like Iran, and only a person with a satellite dish and a TV crew could reach a mass audience. And in literally the historical blink of an eye, with the invention of the iPhone, with the emergence of social networks, here comes everybody. Hell yeah. Everybody is a journalist. So we've now lost our control over the means of production. And as a consequence, who do you trust? Now, this is the kind of existential question we face now. I faced that 7 years ago. I decided to go and form a news organization, kind of the first newsroom designed for verification on social media with the help of friends in Google News Lab who made a video about Storyful. This is what we created. We are part of a golden age of journalism and storytelling. Everybody now is a storyteller. There's hundreds of hours of YouTube video uploaded every single minute. But when everybody's telling a story, which stories are worth listening to?
Storyful is the first social media news agency in the world.
One of the big stories we've been covering today is Yemen. We found this pretty dramatic video. So what we want to do is go to Google Maps, establish the location. We find the building here, which matches exactly. And now we're going to attempt to get clearance for the content and provide it to our clients for use.
So what we were doing there was three things with Storyful. First of all is technology, and it was technology that we sort of started with the principle that every news event creates a community and every community creates content. And we can use technology to map out the characteristics of each piece of content to let us make a decision between true and bullshit. That's the technology. The second part was the journalism, what we would call the human algorithm. And this was challenging journalists that we worked to consider a very different model for breaking news particularly. First of all, you leave your competitive rivalry at the door when you enter this open newsroom we're asking you to join. You collaborate and you celebrate when you stop a story, not when you break a story. So you're kind of inverting the culture of journalism. The third thing was critical is that from the very beginning, we had the support of technology companies like YouTube. We curated videos from the Arab Spring, and then we worked with Facebook later, and we created a newswire for Facebook. And so what we had was these three elements: technology, the human algorithm, and the direct support of those technology platforms. And in some ways, nothing has changed since we set up 7 years ago. This model, I think, is still valid if we're talking purely about truth. And I think, for example, a huge support of the work that Claire has done with First Draft Movement, what you're doing with cross-check. But at the same time, what Claire has done, I think, is open up my eyes to the scale and sophistication of the problem we face right now. I'm drawn to that diagram that Claire puts out to just describe the sophistication now in the definition we have to apply to different categories of fake news. There's no longer a binary choice here between it's false or it's true. I mean, these 7 categories tell us something has happened with the dark forces that are lurking in plain sight on the social web. The first thing is they have created this chaff, as we heard earlier on, that is the core of a misinformation. The second thing, which is even scarier, is that they have taken technology, collaboration, and use of social platforms, and they have weaponized the tools that we use to fight in misinformation. We're in an arms race, as far as I'm concerned, again with those dark forces. So when you take it to that extent, where we still have valid principles we can use to fight misinformation. But we now have reached, the analogy I used was arms race, maybe a better analogy is a global environmental disaster, where essentially we have this overwhelming wave of polluted information coming out of small sources. And what we need to do is realize that journalism is now a global cause that can't be left to journalists on their own. That essentially we're looking at the creation of journalism as a public utility, uniting a ground coalition of forces that we've never contemplated before. Clearly, it's publishers and it's platforms, it's non-profit and it's profit. It's science and it's journalism, and it has to involve policymakers, essentially purifying the supply of information to every single person on the planet. This is where I get to my final distinction between truth, which let's say we have found a way to battle misinformation, to the point where we're at trust. I really comfort myself last couple of months with this quote from Aldous Huxley. Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. And I kind of feel like maybe he's wrong. Maybe he's wrong. We've heard earlier on about the idea that when we go to somebody with a fact or a piece of truth, they may choose not to believe us. We may bludgeon them with facts. They will turn further away from us. They will trust us less. There is not a direct relationship between the two. Now, obviously, we can talk about changes in human psychology, the fact that this cognitive overload has forced people to take refuge in their biases, what the social psychologists call heuristics, those shortcuts we take. We can certainly blame the transfer over the power of distribution of journalism from us to social platforms like Facebook, where essentially that personal newsfeed now is shaped by algorithms that are there to provoke emotion, not to prioritize truth. But the biggest culprits, to be quite honest for me, would be journalists ourselves, specifically the business model that we use to support journalism. That tells us we throw as much content as we possibly can out there on these social platforms into programmatic ad buckets that make no distinction between quality and clickbait, in the hope that we'll reach the maximum number of eyeballs we can. If you were to design a model to erode trust in journalism, you could not design a better model than our current business model. And so I'm asking you in my last moment here to say, we've got a lot of focus now on resources, on innovation around fact-checking and the battle against misinformation, the battle for truth. And that is fantastic. It is necessary, but is not sufficient. I think we have to start thinking about innovation around our business model as a cure for what ails us when it comes to declining trust. Like you, I suppose I remember that great moment I read that book, Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky, which I was reminded by James was stolen from James Joyce as a title. I'm asking you to invert that. I'm asking you to think about, here comes somebody. And I'm asking you to think that perhaps what we need for trust in journalism is the concept that we need a new model of journalism that is built on a direct relationship with an individual within that crowd. We need a business model that perhaps still retains some dependence on advertising, but a changed form of advertising in which there are quality filters, which we think about revenue per user, not these total quarterly estimates that we judge our businesses on. But more importantly, that we think about direct value, a transaction between an individual and a journalist. We think about how will somebody pay? Because subscriptions are up for the New York Times. I celebrate that. But I wonder if that one-size-fits-all model for subscription is fit for purpose. I don't think it is. I want to see innovation and focus put on micropayments, on tipping, on bundling together a Netflix for news. This is what I would like to see as part of what we're focused on in terms of trust. I also think we should be looking at the concept of who is somebody and how do we reach them? How do we micro-target people like the marketers are doing and the Cambridge Analyticas and the spin doctors, targeting individuals based on their emotional attachment to things as opposed to their demographic groups? How do we do that to secure the sacrosanct nature of the editorial content that we put out? So I'm going to leave it there and say, please, over the next 36 hours, can I give you that challenge as you think about this new newsroom? All the facts in the world, all the truth in the world will not restore trust in journalism unless you replace a model that's about reaching everybody with a model that's based on the depth of your engagement with somebody. Thank you.